Is genomic information having too much influence in the Angus evaluation? And so basically just wanted to start at square one of what are EPDs, how are they expected to work, how do we see them working in the beef industry, and how is DNA information being used in the Angus evaluation, and how is it helping? So we use that acronym EPD, EPD, EPD. We hear it all of the time, but I think it's really easy to lose focus of what that acronym actually stands for. And so it's for expected progeny difference. And the reason I always bring that up is expected is a very loaded word in this context. So not only is it talking about a prediction of the future, but it's also meaning an average of a large group. So I think sometimes when we look at or think about EPDs, we think this is a precise estimate for this one animal, and really it's a prediction about how the average of a calf crop is going to perform. EPD is just describing the center of the bell curve, and so there's going to be, because of the randomness we deal with in genetics and biology, there's going to be some animals that underperform in that calf crop, and there's going to be some animals that outperform. So there's always that variation, but we can move that bell curve whichever direction we want it to go based on using the EPDs. But now we have a new opportunity that with genomics, we can more precisely measure that genetic similarity, and when we get the measures of genetic similarity more accurate, the EPD becomes more accurate. So one of the great things that we've been able to done recently in the beef industry is launch what we call single-step genomic predictions. So previously we had that DNA test result as kind of this fourth piece of information that was floating off by itself, and it was really hard to make sure that we were tying it in with the rest of the information accurately and appropriately. So now with the move to single-step, we're using pedigree information to measure genetic similarity, and for those animals that are DNA tested, we're using genomic information to measure genetic similarity. And so now all of the data is tied together in a single analysis, and it's a very elegant way to make sure that all of the data is contributing appropriately to the national cattle evaluation. So now the performance data that we collect and the contemporary groups that we report, the pedigree information, the genomics, they're all working together, pulling in the same direction, trying to make sure that we get as accurate predictions as possible. So one of the questions that I often get is, should I spend my energy, money, and focus on collecting more phenotypes, more trait records, or should I spend those resources on genomic data? And the answer I give is really we should be doing both, right? So at the end of the day, if we stop collecting trait records, our genetic evaluations fall completely apart. So it's so important that we get complete, accurate records turned in, because that's really what drives the bus, is we have to get those trait records in. And so I think in a lot of terms, people think about this as a this versus that, and I really like to see the two work together. So the analogy that I use is trying to get juice out of a fruit, okay? The fruit is the raw data, is the data that the producer turns in. And so with pedigree information, we can squeeze so much juice, so much information out of that data. What the genomics allows us to do is to squeeze that fruit even harder and get more actionable information out of that data. So in my mind, the genomic testing actually makes those phenotypes more valuable. We get more out of them. So that's a common misconception, is that as we increase the accuracy of a genetic prediction, the variation that we see in the calf crop should decrease. But the variation that we see in calf crops is due to biological processes that we can't control. So between every generation, we have a random shuffle of the genes and chromosomes. And so that ensures that the shape of that bell curve stays the same generation after generation. What we do with EPDs is actually change the position of that bell curve. And based on the decisions of the breeder, we can either make that bell curve goes higher, or we can make that bell curve go lower. But the EPD doesn't change the variation in the population. So one of the things that producers, especially commercial producers, are worried about is risk of certain things going wrong. And so a great example of this is calving ease. And so, like we were just talking about, we can't really change the shape of that bell curve for calving ease problems, but what we can do with EPD selection is move that bell curve so far in the positive direction that we've substantially reduced our risk of seeing calving ease problems. So consistency is one of those things that producers really crave. They want to make sure that they have that very predictable, very uniform calf crop, and biology just continues to smack us in the face and not give us that consistency. And so through genetics, genetic variation is always going to be there. We can improve our genetics through selection, but one of the points that was highlighted today is one of the ways that we can create more consistency in a calf crop is making sure that we're doing the management decisions in the right way. And so there's lots of things that we can do to make sure a calf crop is consistent. Part of it is making sure that we're picking the right bulls and finding those bulls that meet our genetic criteria. But it's kind of the whole picture can give us a consistent calf crop.